Okay, now that we're on the topic of scatter plots, we're going to go into another component called trend lines. Okay, so what is a trend line? Well, it's when a scatter plot demonstrates a linear relationship. So in our last video, we identified our scatter plots and their patterns, and we decided if they were linear or nonlinear. Well, if a scatter plot is in fact linear, a straight line can be used to show the general pattern of that data. A trend line, or you'll hear it referred to as a line of best fit, is a straight line that should lie as close as possible to the point of the data in the scatter plot. So you're normally going to be able to draw a trend line down the center of all your points. So take a look here. Let's look at number 1. They drew a line. The data, the points are going in a linear direction, but does the trend line, is it a line of best fit for that data? I guess I should say. Explain. Well, obviously one would be a no. The scatter plot has a positive trend, whereas the line has a negative trend. So it is not a line of best fit. When we go look at 2, both our data points and our line are going in a negative direction, and our line for the most part is centered among the data. So yes, it would be a good fit because it lies close to the data points. Now look at number 3. So I'm wondering if you're seeing this already. Both our data points and our line are going in a negative direction. However, a majority of our points are below our line. So no, this is not a good line of best fit because the trend line is above most of the points. And then number 4, I'm sure you're at that point already and you identify it. This would also be a no because in this case, our trend line is below most of our data. So you are able to write equations of trend lines. Here's how we do that. We can choose any 2 points on the line and set up a ratio to find their slopes. Okay, then we look at the y-axis to find the y-intercept or our beginning point. And then we're going to write an equation in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. So that's where our previous chapter comes in play here. And it's important to have these equations of trend line because it's these equations that allow us to make more accurate predictions. So let's look at this one. We're going to write the equation in slope-intercept form for each trend line. Well, if I take a look at this one, okay, we're going to find my slope and we're going to find my y-intercept. I personally like to find b first. Where does that line touch the y-axis? Well, it's at 8, so my b is 8. It said pick any 2 points. Why not use that point, 8, and then the next point? Remember, it's where our grid lines meet is our next point. So what happens is I would go down 1 and write 3 to have -1/3. That's my slope. So I'm then going to write it as y equals -1/3 x plus 8. Okay. So let's try this one. Same concept. Write your m, write your b. Now, I like to begin with my b. And you have to be careful on this one. It's a little different. My b is 100. So there's 1 point already. So I can use that point and the next point. However, when I go from my y-intercept up, I'm going up 25. Look at the numbers on the side, okay? There's a line in between 100 and 150. Then what happens is I go to the right 2. So I write y equals 25/2x plus 100. Now it's important to know that trend lines are real world situations. And remember, Mrs. Nell and I talked about that a real world slope is its rate of change, and we actually calculate it. So you could also write this, instead of 25 halves, you could say 12.5. That is another option. So let's take a look at this one. If we write an equation in slope-intercept form, we must find our slope and our y-intercept. Same thing, there's the place where my line touches the y-axis. And the next point I'm going to go to, okay, is right here. So we began at 45. You have to read your intervals, ladies and gentlemen. From that first point to my next point, I'm actually going down 10. Okay, and then my x-axis is every 1, so I go right 1. So I end up with y equals negative 10x plus 45. So why have these? Well, we can interpret data and we can use these equations for things. So to find the slope of the trend line below, Riley chose 2 points. Okay, so she chose 180 and 230. Okay, so the question is, are those points she chose going to help her to write the correct equation of the line? Those are points on the graph, but they're not going to help her write the equations of the line because they don't fall directly on that graphed line. It's not a matter of the points. It's not a matter of our scatter points or a point on the plane. We want to look at that black line that's drawn and pick 2 points on that line. So if we wanted to find the equation of this trend line, we start with my M and my B again, ladies and gentlemen. In this case, my B is 90. And then my slope is negative 20 because I'd go down 20 and then I'd go right 1. So the equation of this trend line is y equals negative 20x plus 90. We need you to write in here, please. The 2 points must fall on the line. So we can gauge based off our knowledge. So they're wanting us to determine which scatter plot could have a trend line like this. Well, let's take a look. Y equals 2x plus 5. So if we want to look at this, our slope is 2 and our y-intercept is 5. So I can right away cross out A and D. Why? Why can I cross out A and D? And I want you to write this down. They would eliminate because they're going in a negative direction, meaning their trend line would have a negative slope. Ours has a positive. So there's another aspect we need to look at. We can eliminate B. Well, why is that? And you need to write this down. B's trend line would begin at 0. Okay, do you see how the data points are starting at the bottom? Our trend line should begin at 5. Therefore, C is our only choice. And by writing what I have here on the side, you've explained your choice. So knowing what you've known and what we've gathered from the past units, here's what I want you to do. On A, I want you to tell me the slope of this trend line. And what does that slope mean in this context? Think about what it is. A teacher surveyed one of her students by asking how many minutes they spent studying for their math test and then their score they got. So please interpret what this slope means. What is the y-intercept of this trend line? And what does the y-intercept mean? And then finally, write the equation of the trend line. So our skills from previous chapters are still being used. It hasn't changed. You just now have to apply their meaning.